past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery.
Greetings and welcome back as always. You know, the Senate voted 51-50 to pass the Republicans' massive domestic policy bill. Vice President Vance was called upon to cast the deciding vote to break the tie in favor of passage. The changes made to Trump's big tax bill in the Senate is going to pile trillions onto the national debt load while resulting in even steeper losses in healthcare coverage, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. They have determined this in their latest analysis. Folks, this is not one big, beautiful bill, as the Trumpians are calling it. It's not even lipstick on a pig. It's that horrendous. Why are so many who will be negatively impacted by this boondoggle, why are they supporting it? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. Let's quickly look at some of today's headlines. The U.S. halts some weapons shipments to Ukraine as Kyiv scrambles to respond. The Washington Post reports Ukrainian officials scrambled to clarify the situation today after the United States announced that it was halting deliveries of air defense munitions to Ukraine. The U.S. Defense Department decided to halt some shipments to Ukraine after a review found American military stockpiles to be low. White House spokesman Anna Kelly said, quote, "This decision was made to put America's interests first following a review of our nation's military support and assistance to other countries across the globe," she said. Basically, what that means is when you look at what's been transpiring in Ukraine with air defense, and when you're looking at what just transpired between the United States, Israel against Iran, they're running out of weapons. Kyle Anazone reports Trump to ramp up programs to build democracy in Cuba. Trump ordered his administration to ramp up efforts to bring down the Cuban government. The policy calls for tightening sanctions and programs. The approach calls for tighter enforcement of existing sanctions and travel restrictions against the Caribbean nation. In addition, Washington will step up its considerable efforts to undermine the government by funding programs that ostensibly, quote unquote, promote democracy. However, folks, similar programs have been used by the U.S. around the globe to complete regime change operations. There are two things that I think quickly that we need to understand about this. First, overwhelming evidence has shown us over time sanctions just don't work. Sanctions actually tend to make the target government stronger because sanctions heighten the sense of nationalism within the target country and allow the leader in question or the target to say, look, it's not me, it's them. It's their sanctions that are making your life so horrific. It's not my policy. Folks, they then say to their constituents, it's them versus us. And hence you get a heightened sense of nationalism. Second, the so-called promotion of democracy that they're referring to has actually nothing to do with democracy. It has much more to do with finding an individual within a country that the United States can back, and that person will back the neo-colonial, neoliberal policies that the United States government wants that country to employ. The U.S. overthrew the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine in 2014. Remember that? Now we claim to be in Ukraine trying to defend democracy when they had a democratically elected government that Samantha Power, I think it was Samantha Power, and others overthrew. And remember, the United States tried to impose Juan Guaido on the Venezuelan people as the president of Venezuela over the current democratically elected president, Nicolas Maduro. Folks, that BS just won't fly. Israeli airstrikes kill Gaza hospital director along with his family. And let's see, I believe we've got some video here on that point that we want to run quickly. Are we going to the video? There we go. Today, an Israeli airstrike on an apartment in Gaza City killed Dr. Marwan al-Sultan, the director of the Indonesian hospital, as the Israeli military continues to kill medical workers and decimate Gaza's healthcare infrastructure. According to the Associated Press, al-Sultan was killed alongside his wife, his daughter, and his son-in-law. Other reports indicate even his sister is among the dead. And all of this while President Trump is scheduled to welcome his partner in war crimes, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to the White House on Monday. Make this make sense. Iran says it needs time to decide on resuming negotiations with the U.S. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran needs to ensure the U.S. won't attack again during negotiations. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Ragachi, has said that Tehran needs time to decide whether or not it will resume talks with the U.S. following the 12-day U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, which was launched under the cover of negotiations. Trump had previously said that talks could resume as early as this week, a claim Tehran has denied. Quote, "I don't think negotiations will start as quickly as that," Aragshi told CBS News. Quote, "In order for us to decide to re-engage, we will have to first ensure that America will not revert back to targeting us in a military attack during the negotiations. And I think with all these considerations, we'll need more time," Aragshi added. And again, it's always important to remember there was no military nuclear program in Iran. That was a fiction, that was a lie, and that was a false premise used to base an attack on Iran, to which I then asked the question, where are the weapons of mass destruction that were supposed to be in Iraq? On today's episode, the issue before us is the Senate voted 51-50 to pass Republicans' massive domestic policy bill. Vice President Vance cast the deciding vote to break the tie in favor of passage. Now, House Republican leaders are trying to corral enough votes to pass Trump's massive tax and immigration bill ahead of the July 4th deadline that was imposed by Trump. What are the real impacts of this humongous transference of wealth bill? Well, my guest is an associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, former president of the National Economics Association, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. As always, my brother, welcome back.
Always good to be here.
So, quote, "Our country will make a fortune this year, more than any of our competitors, but only if the big, beautiful bill is passed," end quote. Then he added, "Republicans, don't let the radical left Democrats push you around. We've got all the cards and we're going to use them." Trump posted this on Truth Social early this morning. Dr. Tauheed, your thoughts overall?
Well, in reference to that last statement that they have all the cards and they're going to use them, I would say the other side has cards but will not use them, so it doesn't matter how many cards that their side has. The other side has, the Democrats have decided to, as James Carville advised them, play dead. Although they voted unanimously against this bill in the Senate and had, I believe, 2 Republican senators come over. They did no lobbying against the bill. They did no information out to the public. They put no pressure on these senators in their home states, the senators who voted for the bill. They put no pressure on these senators to explain to their constituents how this bill is going to hurt them. And so essentially their vote against was pro forma. And we know that, the vote counting gets done well before the vote happens. And so the fact that Vice President Vance had to break the tie was something that was already understood. It was already known to happen. And so the Republicans got what they wanted. To the first point made that our country will make a fortune when this bill is passed. that's obviously, well, not obviously, it's historically not true that when you lower taxes or decrease the tax rate for corporations, the economy does better. Corporations, of course, make more money because they pay less taxes. But this bill is estimated by the Office of Management and Budget to put about $4.5 trillion into the federal deficit. That deficit is not caused by increased spending because, in general, this bill is decreasing spending except for defense. No, it's going to cause that deficit is going to come because that $4.4 trillion is going to go into the coffers of corporations who will not reinvest that money into the economy.
You know, this idea of cutting taxes to stimulate the economy is not a new argument. We've heard this logic before, and I know to many that are watching this, I'm preaching to the choir, but I think in terms of to do accurate analysis or complete analysis, we have to make the point that Ronald Reagan created this fiction. In fact, during the campaign, when George H.W. Bush was running against him, George H.W. called it, Donald Trump called it trickle down economics, and George H.W. called it voodoo economics. And we've seen this movie before, and it ends the same way all of the time. It does not stimulate the economy. Wealthy individuals will do what wealthy individuals do. They'll take that money and they might buy more stock. They might buy another yacht. They might buy another vacation home on the south of France, but they don't have the tendency to invest that money into the industrial base in this country, especially when the industrial base of the country has been outsourced. Dr. Tauheed.
Yes, when the statement is made that this country will make a fortune, countries don't make fortunes, people make fortunes. And so this is going to cause the 1%, the 1/10 of 1%, to increase their fortunes by a considerable amount. It happened with the Trump tax cut in 2017. It happened with the George Bush II tax cut in 2001. In fact, there was a very robust discussion in 2001 about whether the Bush tax cuts would stimulate the economy. And someone like Warren Buffett weighed in on that and said, I don't need another $100 million by cutting my taxes. Give the taxes to the people who are going to spend it. Spending it will stimulate the economy. Correct. But of course, that tax cut was passed, and the economy wasn't stimulated by that process because it went into the coffers of the rich who did not spend that money, or it went to buy back stocks. That accelerated in the 2017 tax cut with Trump. In fact, there was a conference of 100 Fortune 500 CEOs, and in the room they were asked by the moderator, how many of you are going to use your tax cut to invest in your companies to increase employment? And only 2 of the 100 raised their hands. And that called a halt to that type of questioning, because the others knew they weren't going to invest in their companies. They were going to buy back stocks or pay bonuses. And so this is the way it always goes. There's been less talk of that this time in terms of creating employment or stimulating investment. And actually, it's more honest to say this country is going to make a fortune. But you have to understand that it's the rich who are going to make a fortune. The poor are going to be hurt by this bill.
Dr. O.L. Griffin, yeah, I said Samantha Power. I was confusing Ukraine with Libya. My bad. It was Victoria Nuland, another matron of death. I got my matrons of death confused, O.L. So please forgive me. You mentioned the Trump tax cuts twice. 2017, Joe Biden came in 2020. Why didn't the Biden administration roll back the Trump tax cuts when Joe Biden had the opportunity to do that?
I think the simple answer is that those persons who contributed to the Trump campaign and campaign of Republicans are the same persons who contributed to the Biden campaign and the campaign of Democrats. They didn't roll back because those tax cuts, some of those tax cuts went into the coffers of Democrats in terms of their campaign contribution. So we don't really, in that sense, have two parties. We only have one party. And the donors to those parties want the same outcomes regardless of who is elected. And so it wasn't going to be Biden who was going to roll the tax cuts back. And of course, it's Trump who's going to continue the second phase of those tax cuts.
Does that provide any insight into why in your initial statement you talked about the Democrats having cards and not playing them?
Yes, I mean, the cards that the Democrats had, including all during the Trump first term, was to go out to the public and make a case for the public. There were two obstructionist Democrats, Joe Manchin and was Christian Sinema.
Yes.
And we talked then, this was some time ago, about why the Democrats don't go into West Virginia and explain to West Virginians why Joe Manchin's opposition to rolling back the tax cuts or other things was not in their interest. They didn't do that. They had the opportunity to do that, to in essence campaign for the public, and they didn't do it. So it's not only them playing dead on this round, they played dead on that round too. They've been playing dead for a while.
In fact, we can go back to the Obama administration, and I was saying then this was when Mitch McConnell was standing in the way of the Affordable Care Act, what they then labeled Obamacare. And I was saying then President Obama needed to go to Kentucky and hold a press conference in Mitch McConnell's driveway and say to those old, poor, toothless coal mining Kentuckians in Appalachia, look, you may not like me and that's fine, but I am the president of the United States. I am working for you. And those of you that don't have dental care and no teeth in your mouths, those of you that are dying from black lung because you can't get chest x-rays, that's Mitch McConnell doing that to you. Right. This is what I'm offering you. Like me or not, this is what I'm going to do. Of course, that fell upon deaf ears.
Yeah, and part of that educational process was to simply to help people to understand that Medicare and Medicaid was government supported health care, because you had those who were opposed to Obamacare saying, I'm opposed to Obamacare, I love my Medicare.
Right.
You know, they didn't understand that these are the two things. These are both government supported health care.
You even wait a minute. You even had some surveyed saying, I like the Affordable Care Act.
Right. Yes.
But I don't like Obamacare.
Yes. Education is important, but you know, we're gonna talk about that because, you know, Trump in his 2016 campaign said, I love the uneducated, because he can tell them anything and they'll believe it.
And that also shows you the power of Frank Luntz, the Republican pollster, who has, since I want to say the George W. Bush administration, he might have been involved before, but he's been involved directly in constructing the political language. He's been, through his polling, through his what do you call it when you survey a small group of people?
Focus groups.
Focus groups. Through his focus groups, he's been able to determine the language to use to convince people to vote against their interests. So Frank Luntz is a name, and he pops up on the screen on MSNBC or CNN every now and then. But he's been one of the masterminds, successful masterminds behind how the Republicans label legislation in order to convince people to vote against their interests.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's labeling of this is what, the big beautiful bill. I mean, Trump has even gone beyond Frank Luntz in the language. He's actually using languages that words that people can understand. Instead of hiding it in some fancy name for the bill, he just says this is a big beautiful bill. I'm surprised that it wasn't officially named the big beautiful bill by Congress.
And final point on this part of the conversation, because you mentioned James Carville and this idea to just lay back, Frank Luntz, to just lay back and let the Republicans implode. If that isn't the logic of an agent provocateur, yeah. I mean that is, because we're talking politics here. We're talking life and death when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to the food stamp program. We're talking about, and we'll get to this in more detail in a minute, but we're talking about literally taking food out of the mouths of children.
Right.
So James Carville, and I know he watches this show, James Carville, I don't know if they taught you at LSU, but dude, you're flat out wrong.
Well, you remember it was James Carville who came up with the positioning for the Bill Clinton campaign. Mm-hmm. It's the economy, stupid. Well, it's still the economy. And still people are going to be hurt. Now, for Carville to say to the Democrats, just play dead, may be okay because he won't be hurt by the Democrats playing dead. But everyday people are going to be hurt, and once they're hurt, that hurt is very difficult to heal. And apparently someone like a James Carville, who does understand what he's doing, he's not stupid. He understands that people will be hurt, but it's okay. The Democrats will be able to get some benefit out of it. That benefit hasn't happened yet, but he's waiting for the people to be hurt and for the Republicans to collapse in that process, as opposed to being proactive in making that happen.
So let's look at some of the particulars here. The bill is facing opposition within the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. Republicans in the caucus are voicing concerns about the trillions that are likely to be added to the national debt. Mm-hmm. Those that are having that as their concern, they're not concerned about the Medicaid cuts. They're not concerned about the cuts to the food stamp program. They're looking at how much this is going to cost. There are those that are focused on the cut to the social safety net programs like Medicaid. The CBO estimates that the Senate bill will increase the deficit by $3.3 trillion from 2025 to 2034, nearly a $1 trillion increase over the bill that the House passed. And it also found that 11.8 more Americans will become uninsured by 2034. Dr. Tauheed, your thoughts?
Yes, and the way that the CBO calculates that is by looking at the difference between revenue coming into the government and what the government is spending. Now, if the projections that the projections from Trump is that the country is going to make a lot of money from this bill, then the bill should be able to pay for itself, right? There should be increase in revenue as a result of this bill. But the fact that the CBO, which is intended to be nonpartisan, it represents the Congress, not the Republicans or the Democrats. But and in general, their outlook and their calculations are very, let's say, traditional economic. Well, in their traditional economic calculation, they're looking at about a $4 trillion tax cut, causing over about $3 trillion in deficit, adding to the deficit, which means that, of course, there's going to be $4 trillion out into the business community and only $3 trillion back, so the business community can look to become $1.5 trillion richer in this process. And so those Republicans who are concerned about deficit spending, I'll say that they're really concerned about the deficit. They believe the deficit is going to slow down the economy. They're opposed to this bill, but most of them have held their noses in spite of their concerns about deficits. It seems like Republicans are only concerned about deficits when Democrats are in office, but when Republicans are in office, they're not concerned about deficits. You mentioned Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan came in talking about the national debt, and during his 8 years, he tripled the national debt mostly because of increases in defense spending. This bill has that flavor also.
I'm going to ask Melody, please go back to the slide, not the last one you just had up, but the one before that. The one before that. Thank you. And hold that for me, please, because there are a couple things here. One, less federal regulation. And this is an argument that I've always found interesting because rarely do you hear the other side of the argument. So the conservatives love to say that federal regulation, as they love to call it, red tape, costs time, costs money. It just adds to the whatever process that is being regulated.
Mm-hmm.
But what gets overlooked is on the other side of that regulation is the health and well-being of American citizens. And for example, thalidomide is an example that I like to use. In the 60s, that was manufactured and promoted as a drug to help women pregnant women deal with morning sickness. And what they found out was it also contributed greatly to birth defects. So I'm not advocating regulation for the sake of regulation, but what I'm saying is when you think through this whole process, what you always have to keep in mind, whether it's the environment, whether regulations towards fracking, regulations towards drilling, there's an ecological or a human concern on the other side that has to be protected. Dr. Tauheed.
Yes, pollution is costly. And production processes, economists call this negative externalities. Production processes create pollution. The question is, who is going to pay for the cost of that pollution? Now, if you lower the regulations on companies, they don't pay. They can dump their waste into waterways and not have to pay the cost of cleaning it up. But someone is going to have to pay the cost. And if companies don't pay that cost directly, it goes out into the waterways, and people who are going to drink that water are going to have a cost in health. And when they show up at the hospital or the doctor's office, there's going to be a cost to them personally, but also there's going to be a cost to the public for not regulating that pollution. So someone is going to pay the cost of pollution. The only question is who is going to pay. And if companies don't pay, they increase their profits. And when the public pay, the welfare of the public is decreased. And so less regulation, yes, regulation costs. But the question is who is going to pay the cost. And when you allow, as this bill does, increased dumping of pollutants into public waterways, the public is going to pay the cost, both in money terms, but also in health terms, or even in future performance terms. Because if you're dumping something like lead or other heavy metals into the waterway, that's going to get into the water of children who are going to drink that water, and it's going to cause a decrease in their academic performance, which down the line is going to create a cost to this country in terms of its ability to be competitive with other countries.
And to that point, Dr. Tauheed, there are things called microplastics, which are now being found in fish. And now they're saying that you can do a blood test on just about any human on the planet, and you will find microplastics in the blood of humans because it has found its way into the food chain, and we are consuming that food. When you look at what the Trump administration has done with the emissions standards in California and the emission requirements in terms of cars that are sold in California, because California is one of the largest car buying states in the country, auto manufacturers tend to manufacture cars to adhere to the California standards. Well, yeah, it costs a little more money to buy that car, but who wants to breathe the smog that is created from the cars without those? And when you look at the progress in the air quality in California over the last 20 to 25 years, there's been a tremendous improvement in the air quality in the state because of the reduction of emission standards.
Yes, you and I can both remember, and you're from California, so you probably experienced it. The pictures in Los Angeles and other cities where you could barely see the buildings, the skyscrapers, because of the fog. That's gone.
Right.
Because and California responded to that by putting in emission standards so that the air would be cleaner. The issue of water pollution and air pollution is you just can't restrict it to the place around which that pollution occurs. It goes everywhere, including around the world. And so you get pollution and microplastics and other kind of things that's traveling. We have fish being caught in Antarctica that have been polluted with microplastics. It's gone everywhere. And so the public picks up the cost of that as opposed to the business. The business should pick up the cost of that. Now that will increase the price of the product, but it's a trade-off. You either pay a little more for your bananas or you pay a lot more for your health care when you eat bananas that are polluted with glyphosate or other kinds of pollutants.
Kevin Baptiste, thank you very much for that $5 super sticker. And Kevin is a member of the Connecting the Dots Club. And he says, so Dr. Tauheed, you're saying the logic of profit is in contradiction with the logic of need?
It can be. What Adam Smith argued, let's go back to the original source of this idea. Mm-hmm. Adam Smith argued that there were two things that were necessary in capitalism. He didn't call it capitalism, but he was promoting another economic system. One is competition. The other is self-interest. The self-interest that he proposed was what he called enlightened self-interest. That is not selfishness, not an idea that is only profit for me and I'm not concerned about you. The thing that we have to have is understanding that I need to be concerned about you, because if I'm not concerned about you and you become poor, you're going to do something to get that your interest satisfied, and that might mean that you take it out on me. So we need competition and we need self-interest. And so profit, companies making profit is not contrary to the well-being of the public unless that profit is made in a selfish way. In other words, profit for you, cost for me.
And in fact, while you were talking, I was trying to find, because I've got the Wealth of Nations on my bookcase. I was trying to put my hands on the Wealth of Nations, and we see that mindset. And thank you, Kevin. That was a great point. We see that point now, and I'm trying to remember the exact name when the company focuses on the profit and the focuses on the value of the stock, shareholder value. Now the focus is on shareholder value instead of corporate citizenship. Right. And so that's why now you see damn near in a lot of corporations every quarter, there's a reduction in force just about every quarter, because they're trying to maintain that shareholder value as opposed to looking at what it is as a corporate citizen they are supposed to be contributing to society. And
the problem with this selfish profit generation is that it's pathological. Any company that produces a product can increase their profitability by firing all of their employees and putting in robotics. But the problem is, if every company that can do that does that, where does it get the customers to buy its products? Now, when you're working with one company doesn't care about that. They're in competition with other companies to increase their profitability for their shareholders. And if they don't do that, their shareholders will sell their shares and go somewhere else. And so there's this process of being selfish that undermines the process of everyone being productive. And so it's not in the interest of one company to think that it can be profitable at the expense, and that's not going to have an effect elsewhere. This mantra of shareholder value, companies are only concerned about their shareholders and not concerned about other people, means that those companies are eventually going to fail, which means that all companies are eventually going to fail in this process. This is not the way. If you're interested in keeping production or capitalism going, that's not the way to do that. And if you're interested in a more equitable distribution of profits, I'm not saying socialism, I'm saying a more equitable capitalism. If you're interested in that, then the selfishness is something that has to be eliminated. I think Smith had it right about self-interest has to be enlightened.
And in fact, I was looking for another book, which has been moved on my bookcase. The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism by Dr. Edward Baptist, because he argued that the expansion of slavery in the U.S. was crucial to the economic development and modernization. But also in that book, I believe this comes from his book, that part of what contributed to the end of slavery was the understanding that you have an entire population of people that cannot consume products, and that you needed those individuals in the system in order to make capitalism function.
Yeah, this is an argument that goes back over 100 years from an economist, a historian named Edward Beard. I believe the last name was Beard. I'm not sure about the first name. Who argued that the Civil War was not fought to free the slaves. It was an economic issue where the North, which wanted to continue to industrialize and grow as a capitalist part of the country, wanted to turn the South from a feudal oligarchical state into a capitalist state. In other words, it was for the expansion of capitalism, and that would mean, for example, freeing of slave labor to be in competition with white labor, but also to turn them into customers. Right.
So, okay, all right. Melody, if you could go back to that slide, if we can pull it back up, because one of the other elements of all of this is the cutting of Medicaid. In fact, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. The cutting of Medicaid. And so when you cut Medicaid, when you cut Medicaid, you do save money off the top. But here's part of the problem. Women are still going to get pregnant and deliver babies. People are still going to be playing softball and football and breaking their arms and breaking their ankles and tearing hamstrings and other tendons and ligaments, Achilles, and I'm going to have to go to the emergency room. People are still going to have heart attacks. People are still going to have kidney cancer, and people are still going to have car accidents. And whether they have Medicaid or not, they're going to have to go to the hospital. Who's going to pay the cost of caring for these people? Those of us with health insurance will, because our cost of health insurance will go up to cover the uninsured. You can pay me now, or you can pay me later, Dr. Tauheed.
And one reason it goes up is because private health insurance has an administrative burden that's much higher than public health insurance. Medicaid has about a 3% administrative burden. That is, only about 3% of Medicaid spending goes to Medicaid workers, government workers who manage Medicaid. The public healthcare system is almost, if I remember, about a 40% overhead. And so if you're getting health care in the private sector, you're going to pay more for it than you do in the public sector. And so public sector healthcare is actually more efficient than private sector healthcare. But of course, it's not as profitable to those who provide private healthcare. There's also another discussion here that I've not heard. We have an experience with this. There's a requirement for Medicaid, those who receive Medicaid, to engage in either work or school or other kinds of programs 80 hours a month. And that's a good idea. If you can work, it would be better for you to be able to work, because now you're contributing to the economy. We've been through this, though, when the Clinton administration went from AFDC to TANF, because the TANF put in a work requirement for persons who are receiving temporary assistance to needy families, TANF. And that bill was at the end of the 1999, I believe, or something. It was very close to the end of that century. We get into the George Bush administration. TANF is going forward. We have a recession in 2001, and those persons who were required to work in order to get TANF found out there wasn't work available for them. And so I think we're going to end up in the same situation. The requirement that Medicare recipients work, while in general is a good idea, means that you have to have jobs for those persons in order to work. But the workforce is being automated. AI is causing a decrease in workers. And so we're actually looking at a decrease in job formation going forward, while we're also requiring that those who receive Medicare find jobs. And so we have I think we're going to have a repeat of that process. And so what we need is an industrial policy so that we can create new jobs. Unfortunately, this bill also puts an additional burden on persons going to college or going to vocational school, and puts an extra expense on them because of decrease in student loan ability. So we don't have a coherent industrial policy. We will need jobs. We'll have fewer persons who are trained for jobs because they won't be able to get the training in school, while they also will not be able to get Medicare or Medicaid or other types of assistance because they're not working. We have a system that is eating itself in this process.
So there's a piece up here now. Republican lawmakers propose implementing work requirements, as you're just talking about, between the ages of 19 and 64, at least 80 hours per month of work, community service, or job training. Where's the job training going to come from? To your point, where's the work going to come from? Between the ages of 19 and 64, well, if you're between, say, 19 and 22, you should be in college, or you should be in trade school, you should be in community college. I mean, traditionally, that's been and if you're at 64 years old, you're aging out of the system. Companies aren't looking to hire people from 50 to 64. Those folks are aging out. And as you talk about, the robots and the modernization of the workforce, and the fact again that many of these manufacturing jobs are being sent overseas. So Donald Trump, and I know because he's watching the show, Donnie, look at this, man. You want people to work. Where are you creating the job for them to get? And this goes back to Ronald Reagan telling us about the welfare queen and the woman on welfare, right? The fictitious lie about the woman riding around in the Cadillac, all of that BS. And Bill Clinton, with his reinventing government as we know it, also contributed greatly to this whole dynamic, Dr. Tauheed.
Yeah, in fact, there was an important narrative during the Clinton administration about robotization.
Mhm.
And so his response, the Clinton administration response, was, if you lose your job to a robot, you can get a job programming robots. So the whole idea is you become a computer programmer. Now, the economics of that is, if a company lays off 100 workers, it's not going to now hire 100 workers to program the robots that replaced 100 workers. It'll lay off 100 workers, and maybe it needs 10 programmers. So 90 people are going to be out of work. So the idea that we can simply that technology is going to be used efficiently in this process and to create jobs is something that we've known doesn't happen for a long time. Technology displaces persons, and a robust industrial policy will say, okay, we need not just replacement for old workers, we need to train them for new kinds of work. And that work has to be work that's going to be developing. We call that an industrial policy. This administration, prior administrations going back to Reagan, the U.S. has not had an industrial policy since the New Deal. And we don't see one developing here.
And you and I have talked about this a number of times. You mentioned industrial policy. What gets overlooked, what we're not hearing on a lot of the evening news programs, has to do with that very point. Industrial policy. You can't just say, as Donnie Trump is saying, we're going to bring these jobs back. There has to be a process. There has to be, this has to be thought out. And there has to be policy in place to dictate and determine where this industrialization or reindustrialization is going to take place. And that's just not happening, Dr. Tauheed.
It's not happening, and it was certainly would be made more apparent in the recent tariff controversies. I mean, we've had the Trump administration for 5 months, and we've been through a lot of things that wouldn't normally occur in 5 years. But we just went through a tariff regime that's off the news now. But the idea of increasing tariffs on products that are coming into the U.S. without a policy for now replacing the production of those products that are coming to the U.S., so that replacing production with U.S.-made products so that you can deal with the inflation, that wasn't part of the process. It was, let's put tariffs against T-shirts coming into the country from China, as if you do that, American workers are going to start producing T-shirts. Well, a $10 T-shirt becomes a $50 T-shirt in that process. So you don't want to go into the production of T-shirts. You want to go into the production of other high-paid types of production. You need an industrial policy to do that. The U.S. government has to lead that process, because individual companies are only interested in their own self-profit, not in the welfare of the country as a whole. We don't have an industrial policy that looks after the welfare of the economy as a whole. We let private enterprise determine what's in their own selfish interest, which means that this process is going in the wrong direction.
And another element of this will be my final point, and then I'll let you close us out. You're so gracious, folks need to understand you've been sitting in a parking lot for an hour talking to us. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for doing so. Peggy Parks Miller, another member of the Connecting the Dots Club, makes the point. She just says fruit pickers. And so as we look at this immigration so-called policy and ICE going into the fields, we've seen video of ICE agents going into the field, not chasing down Pablo Escobar and drug lords, people that are picking tomatoes, picking fruit. You're going to deport these people. Where are the pears going to come from? Where are the peaches going to come from? Where's the broccoli And where are the cucumbers going to come from? Dr. Tauheed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you thought of this as a plan, then you could make the inference that the plan is we will deport all the fruit pickers, and the economy will become so recessed and depressed that people who used to have jobs as computer programmers will find they need to go out into the fields to pick fruit. If that's your industrial policy, you're probably there's probably going to be successful at doing that. That is not increasing the welfare of the country.
And let me say this. I'm from Sacramento, capital of California.
Yeah.
Agriculture is the dominant element of the GDP of the state. I went into the fields when I was in elementary school in the summer and did that stoop labor. It's 102, 103, 104 in Sacramento. Let me tell you something, folks. If you're a former programmer, you ain't going out into the fields of Sacramento picking tomatoes. Trust me. Been there, done that. It ain't no fun. You're not going to do, it worked for me as a kid needing a little pocket change for the summer. And even with that, I didn't do it very long because it was too damn hot. So, no, we're not. That logic fails from the get-go.
Yeah, and what's surprising in this is that the business of agriculture and the business of other industries that are losing workers to immigration are not speaking up, are not in opposition to this process. I mean, farm country is where people generally voted for Trump. But they're finding out that the thing that they, I suppose, did not anticipate is that their workers would be the targets of these immigration processes. And now they're complaining that they didn't think this would happen to them. Well, okay, if you didn't think it was going to happen to you, it's happening to you. So you need to speak up. You need to get to your representatives who in red states who are red state representatives and let them know that this is not working out for you. They need to change course. And so they, now many of these persons in farmland have attempted to do that, and their representatives haven't shown up in these town hall meetings. Well, I suspect that if they get a chance to have an election, if we're not in martial law, if they get a chance to have an election, they will want to vote these representatives out. These representatives are already prepared for that. They've already got cushy jobs in their future with large corporations. And so the problem that these farm owners thought would not be their problem, even in red states, is coming back to haunt them. And so, there should be a groundswell of opportunity for red state voters and blue state voters to coalesce to change the course of this government. Hopefully that will develop.
And I was holding up while I was able to find a book on my shelf. What's the Matter with Kansas? Yes. How Conservatives Won the Heart of America. Thomas Frank. He wrote this in response to the Reagan revolution. But I think there are a number of elements of. In fact, I'm going to reach out to Thomas and get him on the show. But I think this is a very good book to read because it does give you, it connects some dots in terms of how this has developed over time, because people need to understand that Donald Trump is not the causation. Donald Trump is the culmination. That's what you all need to understand here. He's not smart enough to have figured this out. He's just riding the wave. To an incredibly gracious Dr. Linwood Tauheed, what is it in 2 minutes or less that you want this audience to understand about this big boondoggle that the conservatives, I can't even call it a lipstick on a pig bill because it's still a pig. It's just a pig with lipstick. Jonathan Soul, thank you for that $4.99 super sticker. This big bill feels like austerity. Do we owe the IMF money? That's a great question. Your thoughts, Dr. Tauheed?
Yes, I think the thought just to piggyback on the book by Frank. Ralph Nader wrote a book, maybe about 5 years ago, called Unstoppable, and it'd be great to have him on this program as well. He argued that the issues that are before us, many of them are not conservative, liberal, or red, blue issues. They are national issues. And it creates an opportunity for those on the right and those on the left who are not ideologically in those positions to coalesce and to work on these common issues. And that if that were to happen, that coalition would be unstoppable. And I particularly call on Democrats, those of you who consider yourself to be Democrats, to be in a position to take the opportunity to work with those persons who are in red states, as for example, Bernie Sanders and ALC are attempting to do by having their forums out in red states, to let them know that the country is at stake. This is not a liberal or Democrat issue. It is a issue that presents itself as the 1% wanting to steal as much money from the rest of us as they can while they have control of the government. And that only a coalition between those who are on the right and left would be unstoppable enough to be able to turn this process back.
Dr. Linwood Tauheed, my brother, again, man, thank you. I greatly appreciate you sitting in a parking lot for an hour doing this program. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the remainder of your holiday and look forward to having you back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Hey, folks. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. We've got 8,700 subscribers, 25 proud members of the club, and that's 25 folks who decided that they're going to invest in this as opposed to that macalata hoopanada with extra whip and cinnamon. We greatly appreciate that. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers, so please hit that join button and help us get there as well. And look, new episode tomorrow. Here's your assignment for tonight. I'm going to be talking about Frederick Douglass's "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." I'm going to be providing analysis on that tomorrow, which will be July 3rd. So your assignment for tonight is to read as much of that speech. It's a little bit long, but read as much of that as you can, because I believe it is incredibly relevant to our politics today. And this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Remember, folks, that talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. We'll be talking about Frederick Douglass's "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Excuse me. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.